Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Technology 101 webinar session. My name is Kyle Hodges, and I am Assistant Director for Business and Technology in the UVA Career Center. As a reminder, in case this is your first session with us, or maybe you've been to a few of these, we're planning these webinars this summer to serve as introductions to careers in technology. And I also want to make sure to tell you that my colleagues within the business and technology career community in the Career Center are planning similar webinars this summer for both finance and consulting, and you can find those in Handshake. And Thursday we have one for healthcare consulting, and then there's one next week for technical consulting that we're all really excited about. So make sure that you register for those if you are interested. But today we're really excited to host Nick Kim, who graduated from UVA first with his bachelor's degree in statistics, and then with his master's degree from the School of Data Science. And he is currently a senior data scientist with Premise Data. I'm going to ask Nick some questions about his background and career. Students, feel free to ask him questions throughout the session via the Zoom chat as well. As a reminder, make sure that you put yourself on mute, and I would suggest putting this on speaker view just so you get the most kind of like pleasant viewing experience rather than seeing like 50 little boxes running around. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So Nick, welcome. I would love it if you would just start off by introducing yourself and telling me a little bit about your time at UVA, both as an undergrad and as a grad student.
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me. Always happy to talk to fellow who's. So back, I guess, wow, it's quite a long time ago now, but back when I was an undergrad, I was part of a couple of organizations, Jefferson Literary and Debating Society, AK Psi Business Fraternity, and the Vietnamese Student Association. Obviously, all of those are not very data science related, but I really think they kind of gave me the cultural aspect of what UVA has to offer. And I think, the greatest takeaways from my undergraduate experience were really just figuring out what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. I think the latter was actually more important for me, understanding what I didn't want to do. So I actually changed my major 3 times. A lot of people would not have ever guessed that, just because I think it's always the, put on the front where fake it till you make it. So you want to appear to everyone that you have everything together, but in reality, nobody does. Just, newsflash. And so, I started out like really interested in health and biology. That was just kind of what I studied in high school, like what I really focused on. And then kind of pivoted to like comm school. It was like, okay, studying finance would be kind of cool. A lot of my older friends ended up, working on Wall Street in New York in finance. I thought that was really cool. And then eventually, I kind of realized that really wasn't for me. And so I found myself really in that niche between statistics and economics, being able to leverage a technical background while still kind of having the flexibility to work in other industries as well. And so, by the time I had figured all of that out, my undergraduate years had passed and it was time to move on to grad school. So I wasn't really quite ready to, I think for me personally, to kind of jump into kind of the career exploration phase. So I decided to stay in school, make sure that my interests in data were actually solidified before I moved into that transition. So I think at that time, data science was really kind of an emerging field for advanced degrees. So a lot of the programs out there were very new all across the country. And so I was already at UVA and decided, hey, why not just stick around? I think I was part of the 3rd cohort since the inception. And so, yeah, and since then, I guess, here I am.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So refreshing to hear another story of somebody who did not know what they wanted to do until a little bit later. So that's awesome. So you currently work at Premise Data. Could you tell us a little bit about the company and maybe what you like the most about it or what drew you to it?
Sure. So Premise is a data company that operates as like a data and software as a service provider for global real-time data. And the types of data that we provide are things like geospatial location, sentiment data for like for survey questions, and image data. So we do this really at our core through the mobile application where users can get paid to answer survey questions regarding certain topics that our clients are interested in, as well as completing data collection tasks. So this ranges from anything between, finding out the price of a specific grocery item at the store, all the way to like finding a bank hidden in the middle of nowhere. And you get paid for all these tasks, and we aggregate all this data and are able to provide it to certain providers. So most recently, we've been providing a lot of this type of data regarding COVID-19 to a lot of healthcare providers and a lot of different organizations inside of the health space. So things like propensity to travel, given all that's going on, like low supply price gouging, things like mask usage, among other things, health related. So that was one of the biggest pushes that we had. A lot of the organizations that we work with kind of fall into three main categories. So it's either private businesses, international development agencies, or government. So a lot of these, a few examples could be like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or USAID. And kind of the things that I love about where I work is that every day is really a new challenge. So we only have about 120 people. And so I guess it's kind of like not the two-person garage startup environment, but it's a more like developed and established startup that really just thrives in knowing that we have a niche space that we can kind of capitalize on. So really growing quickly, obviously that comes with its growing pains, but I think it's a very exciting and fast-paced place to kind of grow technical skills and work with people who are equally as motivated.
That's awesome, and it sounds like y'all are doing a lot of super relevant, important work. So that's really great. So we have a lot of students of all different ages and class years in this webinar. So could you define data science just in the most basic terms, and maybe how did you originally learn about it and know that you wanted to pursue it?
Sure. I think data science at its core is like a multidisciplinary blend between a couple different fields. I've kind of narrowed them down. This is my own definition. So I think it's really a blend between like statistics, computer science, and sales and marketing. And the latter part of that is something that most people don't really recognize as being a fundamental part of data science. But I think being able to convey the message and sell the technical details and concepts behind what you're actually providing in terms of insights created from data is really also a very core part of what data science is. And so to sum that up and kind of make it even simpler, it's using data that you have or collecting data and using it to answer questions that create real world impact, whether that's for your business or that's for an organization that's trying to improve health or things like that. Regardless of what you're doing, data is everywhere, and being able to utilize that data to create grounds for making decisions. And I think the cool part about that is that data science really manifests itself in different ways in our lives that you may not really think about. So every time you pick up your iPhone and use Face ID, that's data science. Anytime you open up Spotify and you look up like the music recommendations that you have for the week, even down to like going on Amazon, looking at recommendations, or even like targeted advertisements that we don't want. All of those things are really rooted in data science applications. I guess the second part of the question, how did I know that I wanted to pursue it? I know that I said I changed majors 3 times. And so it was always kind of there in the back of my mind back in 2008 and then again in 2012 when this really cool guy named Nate Silver, if you guys aren't familiar, he's the person that correctly predicted in 2008, 49 out of 50 states in the election going to Obama using just purely statistics and hierarchical modeling. And then he got 50 out of 50 in 2012. So it's like, wow, that's really cool. I wonder how he did it, doing some digging. And then around the same time, I think it's just like 2011 or 2012, this movie named Moneyball came out with Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill, where like the Oakland A's didn't have that much money, but they needed to compete against all the other big name teams like the Yankees. And so, the way that they did it was, trying to figure out what is the numbers game behind baseball and being able to leverage that into, making their decisions. And so I thought that was a cool way to kind of, leverage the technical background. You could work in sports, you could work in e-commerce, you could work in the big FANG tech companies.
Who works in data science.
So I think it was always kind of there. And then I revisited it. I read a few books, read a couple of blog posts by him. I just felt really inspired and then took a few classes and the rest is history.
That is so cool. Oh my gosh, that's really awesome. And I love your definition of data science, kind of bringing it back to the basics. That is really, really helpful for especially me to hear, because I know I did not come from a very technical background, more so in the liberal arts. So that's really awesome to hear. Let's see. So a little more of a technical question. What types of tech skills or programs are crucial in your work that you use every day?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this answer really varies depending on who you ask. So data science, like I stated, is a very broad field, which means that the tools that you use are very different. So obviously you don't want to use a brick to, hit the nail. You'd want to find a hammer. So depending on what problem you're trying to solve, obviously this answer will change. But I think the very fundamental building blocks that you'll need are at least one of the two of Python or R. Obviously Python is a scripting language that's kind of more flexible in my opinion. R tends to be more for, heavily statistics and forecasting type functions, but it again depends on who you ask. And then I think for anyone who is in this technical community, you really need to know how to use coding version control. So, obviously Git and GitHub tend to be the most popular. So, and then on top of that, I think on a day-to-day, you're really going to need to know how to access that data. So you're going to need SQL or any type of knowledge of databases. And then, I think the next step beyond that is really understanding cloud computing technology. So whether that's Amazon's AWS, Microsoft's Azure, or Google's Google Cloud Platform, you're, pick whichever you like. But I think having exposure to that, at least in some capacity, is going to be a really helpful tool to have in your toolkit. Obviously, there's a lot of other auxiliary data tools that you can have. So things that help you deploy these types of things that you can build, Docker, Kubernetes, Flask. But I really think the most general answer to this question is you need to have a general working knowledge of how most popular programs work. And by that, I mean things like Spotify recommendations, Amazon e-commerce platforms, or social media network graphs. At least having a general understanding of the technology that backs these systems, I think is really the most critical part of building a technical stack to use in data science.
That is so helpful. I'm taking notes furiously over here so I can pass this knowledge on to students later. So this is great. So this is kind of a, important question for a lot of the students that are in this webinar, but so you attended the School of Data Science and received your master's degree. My question is, could someone work in data science without a master's? Could they get entry level with a bachelor's degree?
Yeah, this is a great question because I think people started asking the same question about 10 years ago when tech companies started hiring students that didn't have college degrees. And I think every 10 years, there's going to be, kind of an upgraded level of that question where like, okay, can we hire people that don't have, like college degrees? Can we hire people that don't have a master's degree? Can we hire people that don't have PhDs? I think the question is always going to be, yeah, you can, because I think especially with kind of the digitalization of everything around us, it's really more important to understand what skills a candidate has and what they can show off and what they can do versus what kind of degrees that they have. I think obviously that's a very structured route in order to get to where you want to go. And everybody here probably wants to work in this field, right? So it's like additional schooling is just one way to get to where you want to go. For me, like I would not regret that decision just that I made to go to a master's program just because I knew what I wanted to get out of the master's program. And that was a very structured learning experience that's going to build the foundations for additional learning. And because I was still trying to figure out if data science was for me, I needed that structure in order to kind of be able to build off of that. So if you are already very set on what you want to do, I don't think it's always the best route to go. Depending on like your financial situation, your needs, things like that. So it's a very case-by-case basis, but it's not a necessity to work in this field. And I've been on the other side of the table, like hiring candidates that definitely don't have a master's degree, or even interns that don't have college degrees yet. And they've, knocked it out of the park multiple times, so.
Yeah, that's a really, great perspective and often reflects what we tell students. If you've been pursuing this from day one, year one, it might not be necessary to go get a master's just for the sake of additional schooling. But if, in a case like yours where you're, still, you figured out what you want to do a little bit later and it just kind of essentially getting that training. So here's another question kind of on the opposite end from the question about your master's degree, Nick. Is there anything from your liberal arts degree in statistics that you find to be beneficial to your work today, especially when you think about like soft skills and things like that?
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. And it didn't really become clear to me until I actually got my first job. And it was that nobody really cares about the technical details. obviously the people who work on them do, but when it comes time to like actually present your findings, or, you know, really just sell what you've done, um, yeah, it's how to convey technical details without kind of divulging all the secret sauce that you think is secret, which they may be, but I think, you know, the bluff method or having the presentation with the bottom line up front, I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, which was that in statistics like this course where we basically had to, you know, digest this technical paper and present it to the rest of the class, and kind of talk about, and not have to, and not use any of the statistical jargon inside of the paper. I think it was a really great learning exercise to figure out, do you, one, truly understand the content, because that's really the only way to explain something without using the jargon, and two, like, can everyone else understand, right? So, you know, you could have the greatest product in the world, but if you can't sell it properly, you pretty much have nothing. So I think from statistics or really any liberal arts degree, I think in order to become like a well-spoken individual and in order to convey things properly, I think that's one of the biggest things that you can gain. I think another thing I want to add here is that you don't have to necessarily have a technical background to break into data science. Yes, it may be higher and you may have a steeper learning curve, but if you really have, you know, kind of devotion to do so, you could definitely do it. There are individuals that were in my cohort in the master's program that, you know, came from backgrounds like English. But, you know, even then, when you get into a field like natural language processing within data science, that becomes, you know, a valuable tool for you that other people don't have. So, you know, just people who get discouraged in that regard, just because, oh, I have a liberal arts degree that isn't related to data science whatsoever, you can still make that transition as long as, you know, you devote the time and effort to it.
Yeah, love that perspective. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see. So on that, we have a question here. A student that is doing their bachelor's in statistics as well, and they're a rising fourth year. Did you do the master's in data science immediately after graduation? If so, what choices steered you toward making that decision?
Yes. So I finished my undergraduate in 3 years. So I just stayed in school for the fourth year. So I went straight through graduate school as well. I think the biggest deciding factor for me was I just wasn't ready to have a job yet. So as funny as that sounds, like, I feel like I didn't know enough. And I think if you're more confident in your skills, which I think people should be coming out of a great school like University of Virginia and a great program like statistics, you definitely have the toolkit to do so, to go into a job and learn on the job as well. But I think there were just other factors that I had and other questions that I had about my skill set that I had to figure out first. So school was like a great choice for me. I think, again, it really depends on the decision that you have to make and what circumstances you have. So if you're weighing school versus you already have job offers, it's a much tougher decision than I have to go through the entirety of the interviewing process, which again shouldn't discourage you. But you know, if having that first job and you have more to gain by going to that first job than by staying in school and learning more about data science, I think you know, that's something to consider. Another thing is learning on the job is a lot harder than learning in school. So full-time school allows you to do part-time research, but full-time job doesn't allow you to do full-time school. So you kind of have to like weigh your choice very carefully when it comes to in the next year or so what you really want to accomplish. So whatever gets you to your goals faster, I think, is the way to go.
Yeah, that's really helpful and somewhat related, and you might be able to answer this. Maybe kind of discussing, there's an online, as I understand, there's an online master's in data science program, and then there's an on-grounds option. What could you see as the benefits and or drawbacks to kind of like doing in person or all online?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think the year after I graduated was the year when the online program first started. And I weighed this as well when I applied to a couple of programs with online degrees. If you do it online, it allows you to work as well at the same time. So you get that steady income and you get to school, you know, do school at the same time, which is great. The thing that you miss out on, I think, is really the networking aspect of being in school. So when I was in school, I did research at the Darden campus. And so I wouldn't have had that opportunity if, you know, I wasn't on campus, right? I maybe could have, you know, networked my way around doing so, but it's a lot harder to do that. Not that the opportunities aren't there, it's just harder to find them. It's a little less personal, I feel like. So if you're a people person and you're really good at networking, I would highly consider, going and doing the on-grounds version of the master's program.
Yeah, and it's really important to note, like you said, about, if you're already working full-time and maybe you've been out of school for a while, the online option is really good then too.
Right.
Important note. Awesome. So I'm going to go kind of back to, I guess, what your day-to-day looks like now. So which other roles in your organizations do you typically interact with when you're working on projects?
I guess this also depends on, well, I hate saying it depends, but it really depends on like the size of the company which you work at. So, and the organizational structure of your company. So I worked at 3 different companies so far. And really the biggest driving factor of what your day-to-day looks like is how your team is structured. So when you work at a small company, like, 100 or so folks, I think at every point during the life cycle, I'm talking to somebody that isn't on my team. So whether that be product managers, the engineering team, so back-end engineering, data engineering, mobile app development team, and even, teams like sales and growth and operations, like how do we sell what you're building? So every time you do something, it goes to them, and the product lifecycle is really it is what it says. It's the cycle. So you have to talk to everyone, make sure everyone's on the same page, and kind of make that well-oiled machine structure flow properly. I think as you scale to larger companies, teams start to get a little bit more siloed. So instead of working across these organizational teams, you start to work within like mini teams on the data science teams. So you have one team that's working on data acquisition, data analytics proper, and then you have another team that's working on kind of like the infrastructure and kind of how we deploy these items, more of like a software engineering role. And then you have like the data scientists that are working on other parts of the company, right? So like each silo will have their own like mini data science team. And I think, that kind of correlates to the size of the company that you're at.
And we got a question that kind of goes back to those skills that we were discussing earlier. And so I'm just going to read it verbatim. How important is data visualization as opposed to analysis in data science? And what software would you recommend?
That's a great question. Data visualization is huge, especially when it comes to, working at a business. Again, like I said, like people love numbers, but they love pictures better. And the picture is really worth 1,000 words. So you could have great analysis done, but if you can't present them properly, they're not really worth much beyond what you have on paper. So yeah, the short answer is it's huge. There are large companies that have people that focus just on data visualization. And that makes sense because when you're sending out marketing material, you need to have great visuals. Otherwise you can't sell anything. Things that I would recommend, industry standard tends to be things like Looker or Tableau for dashboarding software. If you're working purely within Python, you have things like Seaborn, Matplotlib. There's Chartify, that's a charting library made by Spotify. Other tools, or if you have more of a software engineering background, you could kind of go for tools like JavaScript tools. So things like D3.js tends to be a very popular choice as well. Those are just a couple of things. Everyone has their own choice, but those are just kind of the ones that you see floating around data science these days.
And I guess so this next question is a little weird to ask in the current time, but what does your day-to-day look like, I guess, that you could go with when you were in the office or working from home, but kind of walk us through kind of what a daily workday looks like.
Sure. Yeah, this is actually a great time to answer this question because people always want to know, like, okay, what are the remote work opportunities for data science? I will say 100% of the workflow can be done remotely. And I think this, kind of quarantine situation really proves it. Other than the meetings, which honestly, I think are more productive than, just kind of meeting online. But other than that aspect, everything can be kind of done remotely. So my day-to-day before this happened and afterward are pretty much the same, minus the people. So it's usually meetings with other stakeholders. So stakeholders being, kind of product managers, engineering teams, clients as well. Kind of making sure everybody's on the same page. That's usually sporadically through the day. And then the rest of the day is really data acquisition and processing. So acquiring data, making sure it's good. That's about 80% of the workflow, or if not more. And yeah, so that's pretty much all done coding. I will say that some engineering teams are better than others at respecting technical time. So a lot of depending on where you go to work, I think the technical time and meeting time tends to be 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, but it's really depending on your preference. So I think as you go to interview at other companies, I think that's a really big question to ask, which is, what does your day-to-day look like as a data scientist? Am I in meetings 90% of the time? For me, that's not really what I prefer, but I think for people who want to be more on the product management, engineering management side, I think that's a great opportunity to grow on that path. I think the small part of data science that people tend to neglect as part of the day-to-day is keeping up to date. You don't want to be a dinosaur when you're presenting like new findings, especially when you have companies like Google, DeepMind, or OpenAI. They're doing cutting edge research and you want to be up to date, right? So if they open source a tool that's like really good for your everyday workflow, you don't want to be reaching for a tool that was built in 1999 that isn't optimized for today's computers, right? Reading about what's up and coming, what's being done, what's state of the art, I think is equally as important as part of my day as is coding or attending a meeting.
Very cool. That's super helpful. So along that note too, what is the best part of your job and the most challenging part?
I think, the best part of my job is really just being in a rapidly evolving field and having to wear many hats at a startup company. Being flexible, I think, has always been one of my strongest assets. And I think this environment really matches that. So there's just a lot more learning opportunity when you have to move quickly, you have to act quickly, and things like that. So I think there's a time and a place to have stability. And for me, like that isn't now. So maybe in a few years from now, like, yes, I will return back to a larger company where a lot of the workflows are set in stone. Things don't, there aren't very many fires to put out. So depending on what you're looking for, I think that changes the opportunities that suit you. But for me, the rapid growth has been, my favorite part of the job. The challenging part has really been not having like cookie cutter solutions to most of the problems in my day-to-day. So being part of like a company that's in a niche in terms of like the technical space, you have to figure out kind of novel applications of solutions rather than being able to kind of go to a third party source and say, I want to implement your solution to our data problem. And I guess that kind of ties back to being in a rapidly evolving field. So it has its, pluses and minuses, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
That's awesome. It sounds like you're getting some really great experience in this environment. So that's really awesome. So let's see. So along that note too, you have worked at a few different companies, including Booz Allen Hamilton and MITRE. Could you talk a little bit about your previous roles and maybe, and I guess this kind of goes back to what you were just discussing, and maybe like the differences between what you did with them and what you do now?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it briefly before, but I think the size of the company is the biggest difference between these three places. So I worked at Booz Allen, which is about 22,000 employees when I was there about 3 years ago. I think they're up to 24 or 26,000 now, which is huge. And then I moved to MITRE. MITRE Corporation is a nonprofit, not-for-profit company that works in kind of the government contracting space as well. Very similar to Booz Allen, just about a third of the size. And then my company now, Premise Data, which is about 120 or so folks. So as you could tell, like there are large differences and gaps in the size of these companies. And so being in a junior role when I first started at Booz Allen, you really have nothing to lose there, just because being in a junior role gives you the least amount of responsibility and the highest opportunity to learn. Just because, as soon as you join and you're the new guy or gal, it's just like free reign in terms of who you can reach out to. And people will say, you can play the new person card very often up to like the first 6 months or so until people start taking it away. But really leveraging that as an opportunity for growth, I think is really important. Because again, like you are an individual contributor, but you don't have to manage any other person. You really just have to worry about yourself, making sure that the work gets done, and being able to grow your skill set. And when I moved to MITRE, it was for a senior position. So managing an intern team, becoming a technical leader, and really just pioneering solutions. So being a technical leader is a little bit different than being kind of a manager in any other field, just because not only do you have to, employ best practices from a technical perspective, you also have to, scope solutions to problems. Yes, you will have brainstorming sessions with your team, but you're responsible for a lot more, right? So not only do you have to code and implement the solutions, you have to come up with them. And then, in moving into premise, at about 120 people or so, each person counts for a lot more, just because like there's, the number is few, but the work to do is many. So you have to do more a lot quicker. And I think not only is that a great place to be for me, but being responsible for a lot and knowing when to take risks. When you couple those two things together, I think that kind of takes you a step beyond like technical leader, kind of puts you in more of the responsible for more moving to management type role. Yeah, which is great. Again, I think, depending on what you need and where you are in your career probably dictates like what is the best fit for you. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I appreciate hearing that perspective and some really good advice there. Students, I hope that y'all got into something from that too. So now, how would you suggest that a student gain skills in data science, especially this summer when we know that COVID-19 has disrupted many students' original plans?
Yeah, the summer has been really unfortunate just because I know a lot of people either lost their internships or even like full-time job offers. So it's been very unfortunate. But I think the great thing about it is you gain a lot of time back in order to like focus on your technical skills. And as I mentioned before, most of what data science is remotely done. So, it's a great time to utilize all these free internet resources. So I think, especially when I was first learning in school, I didn't really learn too much about deep learning or neural nets and AI. But the great thing about that is MIT and Stanford, and I think Berkeley, a lot of the top tier AI programs in the country are kind of just like putting all their stuff out there for free. So if you Google their classes, I think MIT has open courseware and things like that, but all these top programs are putting out a lot of free content for you to, like the lectures and the homework assignments and even the tests. And if you go on Reddit, they also have subreddits for these classes where you can like study with other people. And so you'll find me like perusing these subreddits as well occasionally. But yeah, they're great learning resources. And I think if you have these are all free. So if you have more of a budget, you could go for things like Coursera, which also provide like certificates of completion. So if that's within your means, I think that's also another great option. I think other free resources. If you go on Kaggle.com or on GitHub.com, there's a lot of stuff that people have put out in terms of like their previous code or work on projects. And so those are great building blocks for you to build off of, or even just to replicate for yourself. That kind of gives you that real world experience that I mentioned before. And being able to, display those things on your portfolio, either on GitHub or any other portfolio site, or build your own website. That's also a great experience. I think that'd be a great way to kind of spend some time that you have this summer. And if you're kind of earlier in the technical path and you just want to learn how to code, there's also some free stuff like Data Camp, Code Academy, or if learning SQL is more your thing, I think Mode Analytics has a great SQL tutorial, and they give you a lot of real data to play with, which is great.
Cool, that is super helpful. And students, if you've been in these webinars before with me, you've heard me say everyone now that Coursera is free this summer, and Catherine just put the link in the chat there. But we have access right now to all the courses in Coursera, and they're free through July 31st. And so if you go in there, we have a ton of data science courses available in Coursera right now that you can take. If you start by July, finish by September, then it's free for you. And that's a really good way to spend this time. So highly recommend that. And Nick, thank you for sharing that as well. And I really liked when you mentioned earlier that we can't have any dinosaurs in data science, and we have to keep up to date. So are there any resources like websites, blogs, newsletters, associations, etc., that you stay up to date with for your role that you suggest students look into?
Yeah, you don't really have to be like a big nerd to follow these technical blogs. I think because like AI is so ubiquitous now, it's cool to follow these blogs. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Um, my go-to places are techcrunch.com for anything tech related, um, like Google AI, OpenMind, or DeepMind and OpenAI. Those are the three company blogs that I follow. Those three companies I've kind of identified as like really great writers in terms of giving technical readers the information that they want to know and wrapping it up to a point where it's like an easy read for people and figuring out, where can this be applied as a business solution. So whether you're in industry or whether you're still a student just looking for cool stuff, I think those are great places to go for content. A couple of the conferences that for the very technical people that want to read like and divulge in the technical details, the conference proceedings for things like ICML or the International Conference on Machine Learning, as well as CVPR, which is computer vision and pattern recognition. Those two are kind of like the largest and most popular conferences to follow for those two fields. But even if you just Google around for like data science blogs, it'll kind of point you to like individual bloggers on Medium or on Towards Data Science, which tends to be a big one as well. Those are great, easy reads. They tend to be like 2 to 3 minutes to kind of catch you up to speed on what's being done in industry. Yeah, great places to kind of get like the bathroom reads, if you will.
Yeah, totally cool. Yeah, that's fair. I love hearing about, that's one of my favorite questions so far of all of these webinars, is hearing about all of these resources. So students, make sure you're kind of like taking note of all those that Nick shared. And I'm gonna have one kind of like last question for you, Nick. But students, if you have questions, now's the time to go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll kind of like open it up for that Q&A here. But just kind of like my last question, is there anything else you want to share that you think is beneficial for students to hear, or just, any sage wisdom you want to give?
Yeah, I guess my like parting words of wisdom here would just be that even if you don't want to pursue data science as a career, at some point in your career, I think it'll require you to be data savvy. And that kind of means just like understanding how data technology works, or like what the data is actually portraying as the story behind the decisions that you're making. So regardless of if you're a technical or a non-technical contributor on your team, at some point in the future, I think it's at least good to have this type of knowledge. So if you can't code or don't want to code or have no interest in it whatsoever, I think it's still good to have that kind of like baseline understanding of how these things work and why it's important for applications in your space. Moving forward, like there's all these people saying, oh, data is the new oil. That may or may not be true, I don't know, but I will say that just regardless of what industry you're in, whether it's healthcare, e-commerce, sports, data is becoming more and more prevalent. So good skill to have always. And I guess the last thing I want to say is I would not be here without the help of the UVA community, whether that's with networking, understanding like how technical interviews work, or just like getting resumes reviewed by older alumni. I think we have a great network here, and I'm always down to give back. So if you hit me up on LinkedIn or just shoot me an email, I will do my best to respond. I cannot guarantee 100% success rate, but it's somewhere in the 90%. So whether that's if you have follow-up questions, just want career advice, or resume review, or just want to chat, I will be happy to do so.
Thank you so much for sharing both of those things. And I will +1 the use of data in every role, because I work in higher education, and my colleagues and I were discussing data earlier today. So it's super important everywhere. And we appreciate you so much kind of taking time to give back. We couldn't do what we do without the help of alumni like you. So we really appreciate it, Nick. Students, I'll give you another minute or so to pop questions in the chat. And we'll kind of wait there. Okay, there's one. So students keep putting questions in the chat. We've got about 10, 15 minutes or so left. So this student asked, wondering how helpful was the data science school in finding or recruiting for a job after the program, or was job searching more self-starting?
That's a great question. First things first. So the data science school has like designated career people, which is great. So shout out to Reggie Leonard. He is the man. And so he helps everybody. And when I say everybody, I literally mean everybody. Like at some point, he just like randomly started calling people into his office to kind of just talk about what their career prospects were looking like and things like that. So they're rapidly increasing the amount of resources that they have there, which is great. I will say they do not do the job hunting for you. They are there to help you. So if you think that a job will be placed into your lap, that is definitely not the case, as is with any job in any industry. So as long as you do the work and the due diligence to find the companies that you want to work at, someone somewhere in the UVA community will be willing to help you. And more often than not, that person will be like inside the School of Data Science for you. So the resources are there. I think it's great. I will say that academically, it's pretty rigorous to be job hunting and studying for school in the fall. But I will say like applying for a job in the fall was a lot easier than in the spring. I finished career recruiting in the fall and I didn't have to worry about it in the spring. And it was just like a huge lift, like a huge weight lifted off of my shoulders then. So I don't know if the state of career job hunting has changed since I've been in school, but hunting in the fall, it just seems like there's more opportunities, but that may or may not be the case.
Let's still echo that for this time. So that's awesome. Thank you for that. And then we got another really good question. Do you have any recommendations for courses at UVA that helped you to understand the field or taught you some related technical skills?
Ooh, who typed this? Tommy, I have a follow-up question for you. Do you mean courses like inside of the School of Data Science or just in general? Okay, while I wait for him to respond. So just general courses, I think that really helped. The upper level statistics courses, I think were really great in terms of understanding how to cross-apply technical skills into like some type of consulting type situation, right? You're not always going to be asked to do pure data science tasks. You're going to be asked to solve questions that require technical skills. And so there was a class called non-parametric statistics, which was great. There was also, I think it was called Statistics with Python from Professor Holt in the statistics department. Other general technical courses, I think linear algebra is a great course for anybody to take trying to move into either computer science, statistics, or data science in general, just because it's literally the foundation of machine learning algorithms and things like that. Yeah, and most people don't really like calculus, but I would also recommend that one. I know it's like has a really bad reputation at UVA for being like really hard, but it's helped me out a lot just in my day-to-day, which is not something that I ever thought I would say.
That's a good note. And I think Tommy said in general, so that's helpful.
I also think anything in the economics department that isn't like super niche, so things like theory of financial markets helped me out a lot in terms of like understanding how general economic principles work. And yeah, basically I will say like anything you can find that's related to the domain in which you want to work in, I think is a great application great kind of supplementary task / coursework to the technical field.
Cool. So here's a good one too. You mentioned that having a portfolio might be helpful for job or internship hunting. What would a typical portfolio look like and what kind of projects would be included?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for the more technically inclined, I think having your own website is really cool. I've reviewed a lot of resumes where like candidates will just put their like first name, last name.com or something, and I'll click it and it'll be like all these past projects they've worked on, or even just like, a headshot of themselves and like some introductory information. But it really goes a long way because it kind of shows like the effort that you put into having your own website. But don't create your website and then not put any content on it, because that's worse than not having one at all. But I think the more traditional route is to just go on GitHub, upload your code, kind of share in the front page document like what it does, what your code does, what analysis you found, attaching like any supplementary materials to it, but really just describing the work that you did. And so it's publicly viewable if you set it to be that way, and then you can attach your GitHub profile to the resume. So it's very similar to attaching your LinkedIn to the resume, right? Like at the very top, like people will click on it. If you put your GitHub there, people will click on it. I know sometimes it seems like people don't, but they definitely do. So if you attach it and there's nothing there, it's kind of like, oh man, I wish there was something here. So the formatting is really up to you. It could just be like a very simple 1-paragraph write-up. Visuals are great. So whether that's charts, graphs, or I think you can attach GIFs or GIFs, however you want to pronounce it, to the front page of the GitHub repositories. So yeah, I think that's a great way to go too.
So it looks like questions have kind of slowed down a little bit. So students, if you don't have any more questions, I will go ahead and end the webinar to give everybody some time this evening. But Nick, thank you so much again for being here. Again, students, you heard him say that you can connect with Nick on LinkedIn. I know I really appreciated hearing your perspective, and it was, I learned a lot just about data science from you. And so students, I hope that y'all did as well. You're gonna want the shout outs in the chat over here. So
thank you, Nick.
I'm glad that y'all enjoyed it.
Thank you all for having me. And as Kyle said, please reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions or, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. Students, I hope you all have a great evening.